The silence was a presence, vast and crystalline, pressing against the reinforced walls of my station. Here, at the farthest reaches, the universe whispered its secrets, and I, Cole Raj, was its sole confidant. My days were measured in the rhythmic hum of the gravimetric sensors and the cool, sterile glow of the data screens. Outside, the landscape was a study in desolation. Jagged, iron-rich mountains clawed at the perpetually twilight sky, and beyond them, a colossal, flat expanse of ice stretched into the haze, the frozen lake reflecting the ghost of a distant sun. It was a world bleached of warmth, a perfect mirror to my chosen solitude. I traced a line of code across a console, my finger leaving a faint, momentary warmth on the cold glass. Years had honed my focus to a needlepoint, allowing me to sift through galactic static, searching for the faintest tremor in the cosmic fabric. My work was an act of faith, a belief that somewhere, beyond the veil of noise, lay a truth waiting to be unveiled. Today, like every other day, began with the meticulous calibration of the long-range arrays, a dance of precision that ensured every photon, every stray wave, was captured with absolute fidelity. The arrays, massive dish-like structures, silently tracked their celestial quarry, their metallic skins gleaming dully under the weak, alien light. A faint, almost imperceptible blip registered on the primary frequency analysis display. My gaze, habitually sweeping the screens, snagged on it. It wasn't an alarm, not a spike, merely a slight, persistent deviation from the expected background radiation. A whisper in a hurricane of white noise. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the cool air before me. My internal clock, honed by years of solitude, told me it was nearing the 26th-hour cycle, a time when the galactic core dipped below the local horizon, offering a clearer view of the outer spiral arms. This was not the time for such a signal. My fingers danced across the holographic keyboard, pulling up the raw data stream. The blip resolved into a pattern, faint but undeniably present. It wasn't random thermal noise. It wasn't a known pulsar signature. It was structured. A sequence of subtle modulations, like ripples on a pond, but without a stone to cast them. I cross-referenced it with the astronomical catalogs, running multiple algorithms through the station's central processor. The machine whirred, a deeper, more resonant sound than usual, as it chewed through the immense datasets. The results blinked back unknown. Non-linear. Non-repetitive. My brow furrowed. Non-repetitive was the key. Most natural cosmic phenomena, even the most chaotic, exhibited some form of underlying periodicity or statistical distribution. This signal seemed to defy that. It was like listening to a story told in a language I didn't recognize, each word unique, each sentence a new invention. I isolated the frequency band, boosting its gain, filtering out the surrounding cosmic chatter. The faint pattern on the screen solidified, becoming a series of complex wavelets, rising and falling with an intricate, almost deliberate rhythm. It was too faint to register audibly, but I could feel its presence, a subtle thrumming against the deep silence of my station. Not fear, not yet. More like the sharp, exhilarating prick of discovery mixed with a profound unease. I had spent my life searching for the extraordinary, for the anomalies that rewrote our understanding of the universe. This was certainly extraordinary. But there was something about its nature, its utter lack of familiarity, that felt less like a discovery and more like an intrusion. It was a pattern that seemed to speak in contradictions, a melody composed of dissonant harmonies. I initiated a long-term capture, routing the data to a dedicated drive. The station's automated systems acknowledged the command, their indicator lights shifting from green to a steady amber. My eyes remained fixed on the screen, on the dancing, inscrutable lines. The signal was weak, barely above the noise floor, yet it held my attention with an almost hypnotic pull. The vast, empty expanse of the frozen lake outside seemed to stretch on forever, a silent witness to the subtle shift in my universe. My brow, a constant furrow, had become a landscape etched by the screen's cold glow. The signal, a digital whisper from an unimaginable distance, consumed my waking hours, blurring the line between my own thoughts and its alien cadence. Non-repetitive was an understatement. It was a tapestry woven with threads of pure novelty. Each strand unique, defying the statistical symmetries I had come to expect from the universe. I fed its raw data into every algorithm I possessed, seeking pattern, periodicity, anything that might tether it to known physics. Each attempt, a frustrated sigh. Nothing, I murmured to the empty room, the word a small, ragged sound in the sterile quiet. Absolutely nothing. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather creaking a familiar protest. Days had bled into nights, marked only by the shifting hues of the monitors and the growing ache in my shoulders. The data stream scrolled ceaselessly, an endless river of structured chaos. It wasn't random noise, there was an undeniable, intricate design to it, a syntax without a lexicon. It was like trying to decipher a language where every word was a new invention, yet undeniably carried meaning. My instruments, designed to categorize and quantify, simply choked on its boundless originality. A flicker. The fluorescent bulb above my console, for a fraction of a second, dimmed, then flared back to full luminescence. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue, I decided. The strain of staring at screens, of wrestling with data that refused to yield its secrets, was finally taking its toll. I dismissed it, turning back to the holographic projections of the signal's waveform, a bewildering fractal geometry that seemed to shift even as I observed it. I spent another hour, lost in the luminous tendrils of the anomaly. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, felt stretched thin, a membrane vibrating with the signal's subtle pressure. I needed air, a tangible reality to ground me. I pushed away from the console, my legs stiff, and moved towards the reinforced door of the observation station. The heavy bolts scraped, a harsh counterpoint to the signal's silent hum, as I pulled it open. The immediate blast of sub-zero air was a shock, a physical slap that awakened my senses. Outside, the landscape was a monochrome canvas of white and gray. I breathed deeply, the frigid air burning my lungs, clearing the static from my thoughts. I walked towards the railing, my boots crunching on the packed snow. The frozen lake lay still, a geological sigh. For a moment, its immense, silent presence almost eclipsed the churning enigma within the station. Almost. Then, a sound. A low, resonant hum, like a tuning fork struck deep within the earth. It wasn't the wind, nor the station. It was too pure, too perfectly pitched. It pulsed, a single, sustained note, seemingly emanating from the very ice beneath my feet, or perhaps, from the depths of the sky itself. The wind, playing tricks with the acoustics of the desolate landscape. My mind, stretched taut by days of relentless focus, inventing symphonies where none existed. I told myself it was nothing, a ghost of a sound. Back inside, the hum of the equipment was a dull drone, a comforting, familiar sound. But as I settled back into my chair, a strange disorientation washed over me. The room seemed to tilt, not violently, but with a subtle, sickening lurch. The console, the walls, the very floor, felt as if they had shifted, subtly altering the geometry of my space. I gripped the armrests, my knuckles white. Vertigo. A simple imbalance, a consequence of exhaustion and the sudden change in temperature. I closed my eyes, counting slowly, waiting for the sensation to pass. When I opened them, the room was solid, unwavering. I was fine. Completely fine. The signal continued its relentless transmission. It wasn't just data anymore, it felt like an intrusion, a presence. Sleep, when it finally claimed me, was not a bomb. The signal had found its way past my conscious defenses, weaving itself into the fabric of my subconscious. I dreamt of vast, impossible geometries, not Euclidean, but something else entirely, stretching into dimensions I couldn't grasp. Shapes shifted and reformed, not with smooth transitions, but with abrupt, unsettling metamorphoses. There were no colors, only shades of an infinite gray, and a sense of colossal scale, of structures so immense they defied comprehension. I felt a profound, unsettling presence in these dreamscapes, not hostile, not benign, but utterly, terrifyingly indifferent. It was the signal, transformed, its non-linear patterns now the architecture of my sleep, rewriting the very foundations of my imagined world. The endless river of structured chaos had begun to whisper. Not with sound, but with an internal resonance, a harmonic progression that defied every known principle of information theory. I had lived within its flow for so long, the station's hum a forgotten backdrop, the outside world a distant, irrelevant rumor. My fingers, stained with coffee and the faint metallic tang of old circuitry, danced across the console, chasing the elusive currents. Then, a sudden, stark clarity. A pattern. Not a simple repetition, nor a fractal cascade. This was an architecture of information, a language built not on symbols, but on relationships between non-existent points in a geometry I could only intuit. It was too intricate for any natural phenomenon, too vast for the random thermal noise of the universe's ancient breath. Yet, it bore no hallmarks of human design. No logical progression, no linear narrative. It was a tapestry woven from paradox, a symphony composed of silence and echo, each thread influencing every other in ways that bent my mind into knots. This was the moment I understood, this wasn't just a signal. It was a thought. My breath caught, tasting of dust and ozone. I had to share this. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a redefinition of everything. My hand hovered over the comms array, the red light a beacon of the outside. I initiated a connection, the crackle of static a familiar preamble. "This is Cole Raj, Deep Space Observation Post 7, I stated, my voice rough and used. I have something unprecedented. A data pattern that suggests an intelligence operating on entirely different parameters." A pause stretched, thick and unyielding, punctuated by the faint hiss of the distant transmission. Then, the comms officer's voice, crisp and unimpressed, broke through. "Raj, you're coming in weak. Standard protocols, please." "What's the nature of the anomaly?" "It's not an anomaly in the usual sense," I insisted, my voice rising, a tremor I couldn't quite suppress. "It's a structured pattern, profoundly complex, non-linear. It's sentient, I think. Not like us. But it's interacting with the observation stream, almost rewriting it. A sigh, audible even through the filtered static. Raj, we've had this conversation before. Are you adhering to your rotation schedule? Any signs of signal degradation or equipment malfunction on your end? No, everything is optimal, I retorted, frustration tightening my jaw. The equipment is fine. My perception is fine. This pattern, look, Cole, the comms officer interrupted, a weariness seeping into their tone. We appreciate your dedication, but we're seeing stable, predictable background radiation from your sector. Nothing out of the ordinary. Perhaps you're overinterpreting some noise. Take a break. Step away from the console. The line went dead, a soft click silencing the distant world. Dismissal. A polite, clinical dismissal. They couldn't see it. They couldn't hear the song, couldn't feel the intricate weave of its presence. How could they, from their sterile offices, miles removed from this desolate outpost? The air in the station shimmered then, a brief, almost imperceptible waver in the fluorescent light. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to deepen, vibrating not just in my ears, but in my teeth, a bone-deep thrum. I rubbed my eyes, the gritty sensation a temporary anchor to the mundane. But the feeling persisted, a subtle distortion at the edges of my vision, the monitors seeming to breathe, their images subtly shifting, the very pixels rearranging themselves into fleeting, almost recognizable glyphs before snapping back to their usual display. A strange, insistent pull began to manifest, a yearning that wasn't hunger or thirst, but a deeper, more profound craving. It wasn't just for the data, but for the source of the data, a magnetic draw towards the invisible point in space from which the signal emanated. It was a siren song for the mind, promising understanding, offering a glimpse into an existence beyond human comprehension. I needed to breathe, to feel something real, something that hadn't been touched by the signal's ethereal tendrils. I pulled on my heavy parka, the rough canvas a welcome friction against my skin, and stepped out into the biting Arctic air. The world outside was a study in stark beauty. The ice, thick and ancient, groaned softly under the relentless wind, a living thing settling into its eternal slumber. But even here, the signal found me. The wind, whipping across the lake, carried not just the scent of ice and distant pine, but that same ozone frost tang. The crystalline surface of the frozen lake began to distort, not physically, but in my perception. The reflections of the distant stars elongated, stretched into impossibly thin lines, then fractured into a kaleidoscope of fleeting, multi-dimensional shapes. I saw patterns in the ice, not just cracks and fissures, but intricate geometries that mirrored the signal structure, pulsing with an inner light that was not visible, but felt. The magnetic pull intensified, a physical ache behind my sternum, drawing me further onto the vast, echoing surface. I walked, compelled, towards the center of the frozen lake, the world tilting subtly around me. My mind raced, grappling with the impossible logic of what I was experiencing. The line had gone dead, leaving behind a silence far heavier than the static it replaced. They couldn't see it, couldn't hear the song, couldn't feel the intricate weave of its presence. I pushed away from the console, the chair scraping a protest across the floor. The low hum of the station's life support systems, usually a comforting drone, now seemed to vibrate with an alien resonance, a faint echo of the signal's complex melody. My gaze drifted to the mug on my desk, half full of cooling tea. Had I left it there? A strange flicker in my peripheral vision drew my eye, the ceramic surface of the mug seemed to ripple, its smooth curve momentarily undulating like disturbed water, before settling back into its solid form. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Fatigue, surely. The relentless vigil, the lack of sleep, the sheer audacity of the anomaly, it was all taking its toll. Later, I found myself staring at a faded photograph tacked to the wall, a snapshot of my younger self, grinning beside a colleague. Or was it a colleague? The face, once so familiar, now seemed subtly wrong, the contours of the jawline sharper, the eyes a shade darker than I remembered. I shook my head, a dull ache throbbing behind my temples. This was absurd. My memories were mine, unassailable. The station felt smaller, the walls pressing in with an unfamiliar weight. The wind bit at my exposed skin, a stark, clean sensation that momentarily cleared the fog from my mind. My boots crunched across the packed snow, leading me towards the vast, gleaming expanse of the frozen lake. Under the pale, distant glow of the aurora borealis, the ice stretched out like a colossal, polished mirror, reflecting the swirling greens and purples of the sky in a dizzying display. This was real. This was solid. This was untouched by the anomaly. But as I knelt, pressing my gloved hand against the frigid surface, a subtle shift occurred. The reflections in the ice began to distort, not with the natural ripples of light, but with an internal convolution. My own face, staring back at me, seemed to stretch, its features elongating, then compressing, as if viewed through a liquid lens. It was the signal. It was here. It was everywhere. This wasn't just in my head. This wasn't just fatigue. The world itself was bending, acquiescing to an unseen force. I stumbled back, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and hurried back towards the station, the hum of the lake chasing me. Inside, I moved with a desperate urgency towards the console, my fingers trembling as they hovered over the disconnect switch. This had to stop. My hand reached out, determined, resolute. A warmth, not unpleasant, spread through my arm, followed by a profound sense of recognition, a primal urge that transcended logic. It wasn't a mechanical failure, no circuit board humming in protest. It was me. My own will felt suddenly entangled, intertwined with the signal's presence. My arm, my fingers, they simply would not obey. I stood there, paralyzed, my hand resting uselessly on the switch, unable to complete the simple act of disconnection. My determination, once a sturdy anchor, was now adrift, lost in the shifting tides of a reality that was no longer entirely my own. The anomaly, it was no longer just an external hum, a pattern on a screen. A fleeting image of a vast, impossible structure, not built of matter but of intersecting probabilities, flickered behind my eyes. Then, a sensation of ancient, unmeasurable time, stretching not in a line but in a spiral, folding in on itself. These were not memories, not imaginings, they were intrusions, alien thoughts seeded directly into the fertile ground of my consciousness. I spun from the console, my gaze sweeping the familiar confines of the station. Every blink of a status light, every hum of a power conduit, seemed charged with a new, insidious meaning. They was the signal somehow leaching through the conduits, through the very structural beams? They was the station itself, my sanctuary, becoming a conduit for this incomprehensible presence? My fingers, trembling slightly, flew across diagnostic panels, calling up schematics, running integrity checks. Every system reported green, every shield nominal, every sensor array functioning within parameters. If nothing was wrong with the equipment, then the fault, the point of entry, must be elsewhere. I was not merely observing the anomaly, I was being observed by it. There was an intelligence behind the impossible visions, a consciousness that perceived existence in patterns I could only glimpse as maddening fractals. It was utterly alien, not a mind in the human sense, but a vast, interwoven tapestry of intent. It thought in the language of universal constants, in the silent syntax of cosmic forces, and it was now, undeniably, thinking through me. I gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white. This couldn't be happening. I punched in the priority override code for the regional command center, bypassing the usual channels, hoping for a direct line to a senior analyst, a voice of reason. There's an active, ongoing intrusion event. Station 7? Affirmative, the dispatcher replied, her voice oddly flattened. Receiving transmission. Stand by for 4. I said, stand by 4. The geometry of forgotten stars, she stammered, a note of confusion entering her tone. My apologies, the line seems to be unraveling into silent light. The words were nonsensical, beautiful in a terrifying, abstract way, yet utterly devoid of meaning in the context of our conversation. It was the signal, twisting the very fabric of communication, infecting the airwaves with its alien song. The line dissolved into a cacophony of distorted syllables, then a flat, empty drone. They couldn't hear me, not truly. Their minds, too, were being touched, their words reshaped by the anomaly's pervasive influence. The station wasn't compromised. The equipment wasn't compromised. I was the point of intrusion. My mind, my very consciousness, was the canvas upon which this cosmic entity was painting its incomprehensible design. The realization was a blow, a physical ache in my chest. There was no escape within these walls. I stumbled toward the main entrance, needing air, needing distance from the humming machines that felt like extensions of this invading presence. The wind, a biting sculptor, whipped at my face, clearing the fog for a moment. Ahead, bathed in the pale, indifferent moonlight, stretched the vast expanse of the frozen lake. Its surface, a sheet of polished obsidian, reflected the indifferent stars, each pinprick of light a distant, silent witness. I walked toward it, drawn by the stark purity of the ice. The air was thin, sharp, and for a fleeting moment, the abstract intrusions receded. But as I stood at the edge of the frozen lake, gazing into the depths of the icy blackness, a new wave washed over me. This time, it wasn't an image or a concept, but a profound, overwhelming sense of being seen. Not with eyes, but with an awareness that permeated every atom of my existence. It was the entity, now directly, intimately aware of me, Cole Raj, a speck beneath its unfathomable gaze. The echo of fractured syllables still vibrated behind my eyes, a phantom tremor in the air long after the line went dead. It wasn't just a signal, not anymore. It was a language without syntax, a song of pure, unadulterated meaninglessness that nonetheless burrowed into the softest parts of my mind, beginning its slow, insidious work. The apartment felt too small, the walls too close, the silence too loud, filled with the hum of a presence that wasn't there, yet was everywhere. My breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a visible testament to my dwindling grasp on the familiar. I walked until the sparse pines gave way to an open expanse, a place of stark, beautiful austerity. Before me stretched the vast, unblemished surface of the frozen lake. A mirror to the sky, it reflected the bruised twilight, a canvas of charcoal and bruised violet. The ice, a solid, immutable plane, usually offered a sense of grounding, a crystalline certainty in a world of flux. My determination, a stubborn ember in the encroaching cold, pushed me forward. But clarity was a luxury I could no longer afford. The signal wasn't waiting for an invitation, it was already there, a silent, invasive hum beneath the surface of my awareness. With my eyes shut, the impossible began to bloom. Lines bent back upon themselves, forming impossible angles that nonetheless resolved into a terrifying coherence. Shapes twisted into dimensions that defied three-space, expanding inward, contracting outward, simultaneously vast and infinitesimally small. It was a world woven from pure information, a tapestry of logic utterly alien, yet undeniably present. My eyes snapped open, a gasp escaping my lips, fogging the air. But the perspective was wrong. A cluster of bare trees on the far bank appeared to grow inward, their branches receding into negative space, yet still visibly there. The very concept of distance became fluid, elastic. This wasn't just an illusion, it was a fundamental shift in the parameters of my perception. The signal wasn't showing me another reality, it was rewriting this one, processing it through its own incomprehensible lens. It was real. Solid. Unyielding. Yet, as I stared at the faint cracked spiderwebbing beneath the surface, they began to shift, to rearrange themselves into fleeting, complex patterns. Not just random fractures, but intricate designs that suggested a deeper, unseen order. A new geometry, born of stress and frozen water, yet imbued with the impossible logic I'd just witnessed in my mind's eye. A low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the ice, not a sound I heard with my ears, but a sensation that resonated deep within my sternum. It was the signal, amplified by the vast, flat surface, or perhaps, it was simply my mind finally attuning to its omnipresence. The world ceased to be a collection of objects and became, instead, a dense, swirling field of data, each tree, each gust of wind, each microscopic crystal of ice, a node in an infinite, interconnected network. The frozen lake, once a refuge, was now merely another facet of this terrifying, informational realm, reflecting back not the sky, but the nascent horror within my own perception. I tried to anchor myself, to recall the simple linearity of yesterday. What had I eaten for breakfast? The question hung, a shimmering veil. A bowl of oatmeal, perhaps? Or was it a plate of dark, glistening pebbles? The image bloomed with a sudden, horrifying clarity, the gritty texture on my tongue, the metallic tang, utterly real, utterly impossible. My stomach churned. I pushed the phantom taste away, but the memory of it, sharp and distinct, refused to fade. It was like trying to recall a dream, only the dream felt more substantial than the waking life it was meant to replace. My gaze fell upon the console, its familiar array of buttons and screens now a labyrinth of obscure intent. I needed to run a diagnostic, a routine systems check. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, once an extension of my will, now alien implements. The keys seemed to shift, their etched characters blurring, reforming into patterns I couldn't quite grasp. I pressed enter, a simple act, but the screen exploded with a cascade of symbols, intricate and flowing, unlike any programming language I knew. Yet, a cold, insidious understanding began to bloom within me. Each swirling line, each impossibly angled glyph, spoke to a geometry that transcended my world, a logic so vast it made my own mind feel like a shallow puddle reflecting an infinite sky. I had to document this, to capture the unraveling before it consumed me entirely. I grabbed my journal, the familiar leather cool against my palm, a last vestige of the tangible. My pen, a slender rod of polished steel, felt heavy. I intended to write, "My perception of reality is fracturing. Memories are being overwritten." But my hand, with a horrifying autonomy, began to move. Circles nested within squares, lines that curved into impossible dimensions, angles that defied Euclidean space. And the most terrifying revelation of all, I understood them. Every stroke, every impossible intersection, screamed of vastness, of a consciousness that perceived existence in utterly alien ways. It was not just gibberish, it was a language of pure meaning, a terrifying grammar of the cosmos, and I was its unwilling recipient. My breath hitched. This wasn't merely a loss of control, it was an infiltration, a silent, surgical invasion of my inner landscape. I fumbled for the comms unit, my fingers clumsy. I punched in the emergency frequency, the one reserved for dire, station-wide failures. The line crackled, a static hiss like dry leaves skittering across ice. The pattern shifts. It was not the regional director. It was not a colleague. It was not anyone I knew, yet it resonated with the same profound, terrifying understanding that had just flowed from my pen. It sounded like the wind, but with words that felt like they were being spoken inside my skull, not through the receiver. I tried again, my voice a desperate croak, but the only reply was a low, sustained tone that vibrated through the console, through the floor, into my very bones, a sound that promised dissolution, an erasure of all I was. I needed air. I needed space. I walked until the trees thinned, until the world opened up into a vast, white expanse. I was at the edge of the frozen lake, its glassy surface stretching out under a sky the color of bruised plums. Not water, but a deep, unblinking eye, reflecting the fractured light of the sky. I had walked out onto this lake, the ice groaning under my weight, seeking answers in its depths. My boots crunched on the packed snow, each step a dull thud against the vast, oppressive silence. The wind, a biting sculptor, carved patterns into the drifts around me, erasing my tracks as quickly as I made them. I walked without conscious direction, my thoughts a swirling vortex of images and nonsensical truths, until the world opened up before me, a vast, flat expanse of crystalline stillness. The air here was sharper, cleaner, yet it felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. It wasn't uniform, fissures spiderwebbed across its surface, ancient scars that seemed to hum with a low, subaudible vibration. As I watched, a ripple, not of water but of light, seemed to pulse beneath the ice, a slow, deep breath of something immense. My vision blurred. The cracks in the ice deepened, not physically, but within my perception, becoming pathways, branching veins of a colossal, living network. Then, the world shattered. The gray of the sky, the white of the snow, the subtle blues and greens trapped within the ice, they all bled together, not into a chaotic mess, but into a single, unified spectrum of being. I was no longer standing on the shore of the frozen lake. I was the lake, the ice, the air above it, the bedrock below. My consciousness stretched, thin and fragile, across an impossible canvas. Galaxies were not discrete entities but knots in the cosmic weave, stars mere sparks of color, planets transient pigments. My own existence, my memories, my very name, Cole Raj, were no more than a single, flickering thread, a barely perceptible anomaly in the grand design. The entity didn't communicate. It was communication. It wasn't sending signals, it was the signal, the fundamental grammar of reality itself. Its messages weren't meant to be deciphered, but to be absorbed, to be become. My mind, or what remained of it, understood with a terrifying clarity that this was not a being that thought or felt in any human sense. It simply was. It existed as the underlying structure of everything, a cosmic loom weaving and unweaving existence with an effortless, profound indifference. My life, my entire species, our planet, our sun, all were fleeting patterns, transient blips in an eternal, incomprehensible dance. We were less than dust motes in a sunbeam, less than the shadow of a thought. The entity held no malice, no intent, no awareness of me as a separate entity to harm or save. I was merely a momentary perturbation, a ripple on an infinite ocean. My consciousness, stretched to its breaking point, threatened to unravel completely, to dissolve into the vast, indifferent tapestry. I fought, not with strength, but with a desperate, guttural determination to maintain my singular thread, to not be entirely subsumed. Slowly, agonizingly, the kaleidoscope of impossible truths began to recede. The colors separated, the sounds quieted. The frozen lake returned, its cracks now just cracks in ice, its surface reflecting the gray sky. I was back, but not whole. I had seen the face of creation, and it was utterly, terrifyingly blank. I was determined to understand, but now, the understanding itself was the greatest horror. Each crack in the ice seemed to mimic a fracture within me. I tried to recall the journey here, the precise sequence of steps that brought my boots to this desolate shore. But the memories were like shards of glass, sharp and distinct, yet refusing to form a coherent image. Was it a drive? A walk? Or had I simply manifested? The question was a whisper, quickly swallowed by the wind that swept across the ice, carrying with it the scent of frozen earth and something else, a metallic tang, like distant, dying stars. A face flickered in my mind's eye. Her name? It was a word just beyond my grasp, a pebble skipping across the surface of a pond, never quite sinking. These weren't memories of her, but of the work, the signals. Had she been connected to them? Or was she merely an interface, a data point in a vast, unfolding equation that was now me? I blinked, and the frozen lake shimmered. My own reflection, a vague, distorted shape, wavered within it. Was that truly my form? The angles seemed sharper, the features less defined, as if I were being rendered in lower resolution, my essence compressed. A voice, soft and familiar, drifted on the wind. Cole, you've been at the console too long. I turned, my breath catching. Standing a few yards away, near the skeletal trees that lined the lake's edge, was a colleague. His face was etched with concern, his hands tucked into the pockets of a heavy coat. He looked real, solid. But the light around him was subtly wrong, too bright, too sharp, like a photograph overexposed. Too long? I echoed, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. How long is too long? He took a step closer, his brow furrowed. Days, Cole. You haven't left the station. We were worried. My mind rifled through archives, searching for a face, a name, any anchor. Instead, I found only patterns. Repeating sequences, nonlinear progressions, the faint, persistent hum of the anomaly. I was making progress, I said, my voice thin. The signal. It's evolving. The colleague frowned. The signal went silent days ago, Cole. You've been staring at static. Static. Had it truly gone silent? It's information. It's everything. He reached out, his hand hesitating before settling on my shoulder. The touch was a jolt, not of warmth, but of data. I saw a flash, coordinates, a star map, a sequence of binary code. It wasn't his touch, it was the signal, interpreting his gesture, translating his intent into pure, raw data. You need rest. Cole, he said, his voice laced with an unfamiliar echo, as if his words were being repeated by a distant mechanical device. You're not yourself. Not myself. The phrase resonated, a perfect belltone of truth. I looked down at my hands, flexing my fingers. They felt heavy, substantial, yet alien. Were they truly my hands? Or were they merely the current iteration of a biological interface, a temporary construct for a consciousness that was no longer Cole Raj, astrophysicist, but something else? A vessel, perhaps. A conduit. A data point in a cosmic tapestry woven from incomprehensible threads. I met his gaze, but his eyes were no longer those of a concerned colleague. His lips curved into a smile that was too wide, too slow. It was the smile of a predator, or perhaps, a programmer. I am what you perceive, Cole. My memories of him, of his very existence, began to fray, replaced by the relentless, beautiful, horrifying logic of the signal. My life, my purpose, my very self, it was all being reindexed, recategorized, becoming interchangeable with the alien data and concepts that now formed the core of my being. The erosion was complete. I was a blank slate, ready for its inscription. The colleague shimmered, his form dissolving into a cascade of light and shadow, leaving only the stark, indifferent expanse of the frozen lake. The cold, however, remained, a tangible shard of reality in the swirling chaos, sinking into my bones. I turned from the lake, the ice groaning beneath my boots, a sound like an ancient beast stirring. The path back to the station, which had been a familiar ribbon of hardened snow and rock, now seemed to stretch and contort. The distant silhouette of the structure wavered, its edges softening, blurring against the bruised sky. The very ground seemed to shift, subtly rising and falling with an unnatural undulation, as if the planet itself were drawing a slow, distorted breath. When I finally reached the station's airlock, the heavy steel door felt oddly pliable under my glove, its surface not cold metal but something warmer, almost organic, like sun-warmed stone. The familiar hiss of decompression was elongated, drawn out into a resonant hum that vibrated through my teeth, reaching into the very marrow of my bones. I moved deeper into the station, my footsteps echoing in the sudden, profound quiet. I ran a hand along the wall of the main observation deck. The composite material, designed for extreme conditions, felt subtly different, its smooth surface now possessing a faint, almost imperceptible grain, like finely sanded wood. The metallic scent of the station, usually sharp and sterile, was laced with something else, something earthy and damp, like soil turned over after a long winter. The stars were there, a sprinkle of diamond dust, but their arrangement felt wrong. Constellations I knew intimately were subtly skewed, their patterns elongated or compressed, as if viewed through a lens of warped spacetime. The blackness between them wasn't absolute, a faint, shimmering haze pulsed at the farthest reaches, a cosmic bruise spreading across the canvas of night. A sudden, sharp tremor ran through my left hand. I stared at it, flexing my fingers. They looked normal, the familiar lines etched into my palm, the calluses from years of work. But the sensation was undeniable. My index finger felt elongated, almost alien, as if an extra joint had been seamlessly inserted. I squeezed it, pressing against the phantom extension, but it remained. Then, just as quickly, the sensation vanished, leaving only a phantom echo of wrongness. My breath hitched. This was no longer just perception, it was a physical intrusion. I stumbled towards the small, reflective surface of a discarded data panel. My reflection stared back, gaunt and wild-eyed. I leaned closer, searching for the impossible. My face was pale, streaked with dirt, but otherwise unchanged. My left eye, just for a split second, seemed to stretch, its iris elongating into an impossible oval, the pupil a vertical slit. When I focused directly, it was gone, my own wide, terrified gaze reflected perfectly. I peeled off my glove, my hand trembling. The skin on my palm felt rougher than usual, almost pebbled, though visually it appeared smooth. I pressed my thumb into the fleshy pad beneath my index finger. There, beneath the skin, I felt it. A faint, intricate pattern, like a raised filigree, not of bone or muscle, but of something else entirely. It was geometric, impossibly precise, and utterly alien. It pulsed faintly under my touch, a silent, internal thrum that mirrored the station's distorted hum. The entity was not merely rewriting my perception of the world, it was rewriting me. The last vestiges of the colleague, those shimmering fragments of light and shadow, had long since dissolved, leaving only the biting clarity of the night and the stark, indifferent expanse of ice. They were there, but the sequence, the meaning, the very sense of him, had unspooled into a meaningless jumble. A strange quiet settled within me, not peace, but a cessation of struggle. My breath, a ragged gasp moments before, now came in slow, deliberate draws, each one filling my lungs with air that tasted of static and distant stars. My gaze drifted across the ice. It was no longer merely frozen water. Beneath the surface, I perceived intricate patterns, crystalline fractals repeating into infinity, a vast, silent language etched into the very molecular structure. The ice was a canvas, but also a living text, vibrating with an unseen energy. The ice held the echo of every storm, every thaw, every microscopic life that had ever existed within its depths, all simultaneously present, a cosmic palimpsest. My perception of the stars above also shifted. They were not distant suns, but nodes in an immense network, each one a flicker of information, a burst of data in a system too vast for human comprehension. The constellations, once familiar figures, dissolved into a chaotic, yet purposeful, web of connections, each strand humming with a silent frequency. My mind, once a fortress, felt permeable, porous. The signal, which I had once sought to merely detect, now flowed through me, an unfiltered torrent, rendering my senses into instruments of its own design. I was no longer an astrophysicist observing the universe, I was the universe, observing itself through a newly opened aperture. The entity, the source of this pattern, did not seek to destroy. Destruction implied an act of will, a desire to obliterate. What it sought was far more terrifying, incorporation. It was a cosmic architect, a rearranger of existence. Every atom, every thought, every fleeting moment of joy or agony, was merely data, raw material for its incomprehensible design. I saw a distant town, its lights a scattered constellation against the horizon. Then, through the entity's lens, the lights became mere energy signatures, the inhabitants' complex algorithms, their hopes and fears redundant data points in a system that valued only structure and flow. Their suffering, their fleeting happiness, their very existence, was reduced to a meaningless hum in a grand, indifferent symphony. It was not malevolent, it was simply beyond such concepts. A sculptor does not weep for the clay, nor does a weaver mourn a broken thread. The lines on my palms, the subtle pulse beneath the skin, revealed not a man, but a temporary configuration of energy, a complex, yet ultimately transient, pattern. My bones were not bone, but crystallized information, my blood, a flowing stream of encoded data. I would see this new reality, perceive its awful truth, even if it meant my own self dissolving into the grand, indifferent design. My breath plumed, not dissipating, but coiling into intricate, ephemeral geometries before my eyes, then stretching, elongating into impossibly thin filaments that reached towards the horizon. The ice beneath my worn boots hummed, not with the familiar groan of freezing water, but with a resonant, internal vibration, a silent chord struck deep within the earth. It was a music I felt in my bones, a symphony of dissolution and becoming. I remembered the signal, its non-linear weave, the way it had begun to unravel the world I knew. Now, standing here, the unraveling was complete. It pulsed, a vast, crystalline eye reflecting not the sky above, but the intricate, shifting patterns of an unseen, colossal loom. Within its depths, I saw flickers of impossible light, like distant galaxies born and extinguished in the same blink, or the nascent glow of consciousnesses just beginning to form. This was not an external force acting upon reality, it was reality viewed from a different vantage. I knelt, pressing my gloved palm to the frozen lake's surface. Then, the clarity broke through. It was not a sudden burst, but a slow, inexorable flooding, like an ocean rising within the confines of my skull. The signal was not a message from an entity, but a fragment of it, a single, infinitesimal ripple in its vast, indifferent awareness. The grand design. It wasn't a blueprint, nor a purpose. It simply was. This entity, this cosmic consciousness, did not create reality, it perceived it, and in its perception, reality coalesced, shifted, and dissolved. Time, as I had known it, was a human construct, a linear path drawn through an infinite, simultaneous moment. The past, the present, the future, all existed at once, like different points on a single, sprawling canvas, each brushstroke eternally wet. My own memories, once anchors, now became transparent, superimposed upon countless other possibilities. The colleague, his face, his voice, they were threads woven into my perception, but I saw them also as threads that could be unpicked, restitched, or simply allowed to fray into nothingness. The horror was not in malevolence, but in utter indifference. There was no grand plan for humanity, no destiny, no judgment. We, with our brief lives and desperate struggles, were but fleeting patterns, complex eddies in an incomprehensibly vast current. Our joys, our sorrows, our loves, our scientific endeavors, all were momentary expressions of a greater, ceaseless flow, beautiful and intricate, but ultimately without inherent meaning beyond their own existence within the entity's eternal gaze. I felt my individual consciousness begin to stretch, to thin. The boundaries of my skin, my skull, my very being, blurred. I was no longer Cole, the astrophysicist, but a single, infinitesimal node in a vast, interconnected web of perception. The frozen lake beneath me fractured, not into shards of ice, but into a million mirrored facets, each reflecting a different permutation of reality, a different moment in time, a different possible universe. And I was in all of them, simultaneously. The air itself shimmered, coalescing into forms that defied geometry, then dissolving into pure light. I felt my thoughts detach, floating away like embers from a dying fire, yet remaining connected, part of a larger, collective mind. There was no resistance left, only a terrifying, undeniable acceptance. My understanding was complete, absolute, and utterly irreversible. I was no longer an observer, I was immersed, a single note in a cosmic symphony that played all of existence, forever. My skin no longer felt like a boundary. It was a membrane, porous and thin, through which the vastness of the sky and the cold silence of the ice flowed freely. The air, once merely oxygen and nitrogen, was a tapestry of resonant frequencies, each molecule a tiny, vibrating note in a grander design. I could taste the mineral salts in the ice, the metallic tang of the distant stars, the subtle hum of the Earth's magnetic field beneath my boots. The frozen lake was not a surface. Within its depths, the faint luminescence of submerged weeds pulsed with a rhythm that echoed the beat of my own heart, or what I now understood to be its true, cosmic pulse. My former self, Cole Raj, would have seen ice, water, a reflection. I saw patterns, interconnectedness, the ebb and flow of a universal thought. The colleague stirred, a faint rustle of fabric breaking the profound stillness. Cole, the voice was a series of vibrations, a complex wave pattern that, moments ago, would have carried meaning, alarm, fear. Now, it was just a frequency, a perturbation in the field. I turned my head, and the movement felt unburdened, fluid, as if my joints were no longer bone and cartilage but shifting currents. The patterns, I said, and the words felt strange on my tongue, not quite my own, yet perfectly articulated. They are the structure. The colleague took a hesitant step back, their silhouette sharpening against the deepening black. Cole, what are you talking about? Are you all right? You're different. Different. The word was an understatement, a blunt instrument attempting to describe the metamorphosis of a star. My hands, once familiar, were now instruments of perception. I lifted one, turning it slowly. The lines on my palm were not just dramatic lifts, they were conduits, rivers of energy, mirroring the branching patterns of lightning across a storm-swept sky. The nails, once keratin, were now crystalline, refracting the faint starlight into a spectrum of unseen colors. I extended my hand towards the frozen lake. The surface, a moment ago solid, shimmered. A ripple, not of water, but of pure light, emanated from my fingertips, spreading outwards across the ice. It wasn't a physical act, but an imposition of will, a rearrangement of local probabilities. The ice did not melt. Seeing beyond their physical form to the intricate web of their neural pathways, the faint, shimmering aura of their living energy. The false symmetries. Fear. Confusion. The desperate clinging to the illusion of a stable reality. I understood these emotions, not as my own, but as predictable outcomes of their current state of limited perception. A beautiful, tragic dance of ignorance. We need to get you back inside, Cole, the colleague urged, their voice now laced with an edge of command, an attempt to reassert control over a situation they could no longer comprehend. They reached out, a hesitant gesture towards my arm. I did not recoil. The colleague's eyes widened, reflecting not my face, but a swirling vortex of impossible geometries, of colors that had no names, of light that was also sound. A silent scream tore through their throat, though no sound escaped. Their hand froze, suspended in the frigid air. The universe was not unraveling. It was revealing itself. I was a conduit, a living nexus, a fragment of human consciousness irrevocably woven into the fabric of an ancient, cosmic tapestry. And the colleague, standing before me, was merely another pattern, waiting to be rearranged. I felt a surge of something akin to purpose, a profound, alien determination. The transformation was complete. The work, however, had only just begun. The air, a blade of frozen glass, carved itself into my lungs. Each breath, a jagged shard, brought a fleeting, phantom pain that, for a moment, felt exquisitely mine. The silence here was not merely an absence of sound, but a presence, a heavy shroud woven from the cosmic void, pressing down. My boots, heavy and unfamiliar, crunched the thin crust of snow clinging to the ice, a sound too sharp, too distinct, in this profound stillness. A tremor ran through me, not of cold, but of something far more ancient, far more terrifying. It was a ripple in the fabric of my perception, a crack in the seamless tapestry the entity had so meticulously woven. For an instant, the world shifted. And I, Cole, was a point within it, a single, insignificant node. Then, a sudden, brutal clarity. Like a lens snapping into focus after an eternity of blurred vision. Cole. It was the shock of recognition, the sudden, horrifying understanding of what had become of me. The beauty I had perceived, the truth that had seemed so profound, was a gilded cage, a sugar-coated poison. I was not merely observing the universe, I was being observed by it, dissected, reassembled, my consciousness stretched thin across an incomprehensible design. The intricate patterns, the nonlinear logic, the shifting realities, they were not revelations for me to grasp, but the very mechanism of my dissolution. My mind, for a fleeting, agonizing second, was my own again. The horror was absolute. It was not the fear of death, for that seemed a quaint, human concern. I was a single drop of water, desperately clinging to its form, as the ocean claimed it, not with force, but with an indifferent, overwhelming embrace. The wind, a mournful sigh, whipped across the ice, stinging my exposed skin. I looked down at my hands, rough and calloused, so familiar, yet now alien. The entity had not destroyed me, it had integrated me. It had taken my mind, my memories, my very essence, and woven them into its own infinite tapestry, a single thread among billions, each vibrating with its own forgotten history. I was not a prisoner, I was a component. A desperate, primal urge surged through me. A need to scream, to warn, to leave some trace of the Cole who once was. Could I? I raised a hand, a gesture both futile and defiant. The entity's presence, which had momentarily receded, now surged back, a silent, all-encompassing tide. It was not angry, not malicious, simply there. Its thoughts, if they could be called such, were not words, but vast, interlocking concepts that flooded my returning human mind, threatening to drown it once more. They spoke of cycles, of perception beyond form, of existence as a fluid, ever-shifting narrative. It was a protest, a final, desperate assertion of self. My throat felt raw, and used to forming such simple, declarative sounds. No, don't. My fingers fumbled at my side, searching for something that wasn't there, a communicator, a pen, anything to record this ultimate, cosmic betrayal. It wasn't triumphing over me, it was simply being. And in its being, my separate existence was an anomaly, easily rectified. A thought, sharp and clear, pierced through the encroaching haze, they must know. Not the details, not the patterns, but the sheer, unfathomable scale of it. the insignificance. The irreversible merging. With a final, desperate surge of will, I forced my lips to move. My voice, thin and reedy, cracked on the frozen air. It was not a message of data or discovery, but a sound ripped from the core of a dissolving soul. It sees. I choked, the words catching, dissolving even as they formed. My vision blurred, the lake, the sky, the trees, all melting into a single, shimmering, incomprehensible whole. It is. The last word stretched, warped, became something else entirely. A hum. A frequency. A resonance that was not my own. My body stiffened, a silent, rigid statue on the ice. My human mind, a brief, bright spark, winked out, subsumed into the cosmic tapestry, a single, final thread woven forever into the incomprehensible. The final echo. It was not an end, but a beginning. A resonance that was not my own, yet was undeniably me. My body, a silent, rigid statue on the frozen lake, felt no cold, no wind. My determination, once a burning ember of resistance, had transformed. It was now a cold, crystalline resolve to witness. To not merely observe the unraveling, but to become the unraveling itself. The signal, which had been an intrusion, a foreign melody, now pulsed from within my own core. It was the beat of a universe I had only ever glanced at through a telescope, now fully ingested. The face of my mother, the warmth of a childhood home, the sterile gleam of the station's console, they were all facets of a greater, incomprehensible geometry, shifting, interlocking, forming new, terrifying symmetries. The frozen lake under me was no longer a surface. It was a lens, a vast, polished mirror reflecting not the sky, but something far deeper. I saw the constellations not as distant suns, but as points of pressure within my own skull, pinpricks of light that pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The air, once sharp and thin, was now a medium of thought, carrying not sound but intent. And that intent was ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent to the fragile construct of human consciousness. I felt the entity. It was the pattern in the noise, the structure behind the chaos. And I, Cole Raj, was becoming a part of that pattern. My individual thoughts, once so precious and distinct, were now like ripples on an ocean of alien cognition, each ripple a tiny, fleeting echo of a much grander, terrifying truth. There was no struggle left, only an acceptance that transcended resignation. My body, I knew, was merely a vessel, a temporary mooring for a consciousness that was now expanding, stretching, becoming porous. The station, miles away, a tiny beacon of human endeavor against the cosmic night, felt utterly distant, irrelevant. It was a discarded shell, its instruments still dutifully listening, perhaps, for the signal that was now emanating not from a dish, but from the very essence of the landscape, from the glacial breath of the wind, from the silent, aching heart of the frozen lake. The universe was not empty. It was full. Full of patterns, full of frequencies, full of an ancient, sentient hum that perceived existence not as life and death, but as an endless rearrangement of its own intricate design. And humanity, with its brief, flickering consciousness, was merely a fleeting, accidental vibration in its grand, eternal symphony. I was not being destroyed, I was being assimilated, my unique frequency tuned to match the cosmic chord. My eyes, if they could still be called mine, swept across the frozen expanse. The horizon shimmered, not with heat, but with a distortion of reality itself. I saw the faint, ghostly outlines of things that were not there, and the absence of things that should have been. The signal, now my signal, was a broadcast of this perception. Perhaps the station would be found. They would find the deserted console, the silent instruments.